I'm just gonna go ahead and get started here just because it's 6:30 and we have an hour to get through quite a lot of information. We're going to try not to pack it too tightly so that you at least are able to walk away with some valuable tidbits here. But I just want to go ahead and get started just to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening as we go through our topic for tonight, which is unlocking your intellect and looking at educational assessments and how best to support your child through their educational journey, through this stage of their development. So my name is Suilo Namfukwe, and I am the managing consultant for Eleveight Wellness Solutions, which is a holistic wellness services provider based here in Lusaka, which was recently established and opened February of this year, actually. And so we provide services around all of the dimensions of wellness, the 8 different dimensions. We look at them all, which is partly where our name comes from as well. But we are here to support individuals, educational institutions, corporations in managing their wellness in a very holistic way. And so in that, tonight we're looking specifically at how to support your child, if you're a parent, or your student, if you're a teacher. Hopefully this information translates across the board for everyone, and hopefully it's useful to you all. And today I am joined by, I will be honest, 2 of my favorite people in the world, both people that I have been privileged and honored to work with at some point in my journey over the years. I've been joined by Marina Bezuidenhout, who is actually a consultant for Eleveight Wellness Solutions as well, and is an educational psychologist based in South Africa. And I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit more here in a bit. And also been joined by a good friend of mine who probably knows me a little bit more than that is comfortable. We go back to college days. So we went to college together and practiced together. And he was my supervisor back in the day as well. Nathan Kramer, who is also a clinical psychotherapist like myself and is currently a school and guidance counselor in Indiana in the United States. So thank you both so much for joining us tonight and for being willing to be a part of this. But I'm going to let you guys share a little bit about yourselves and introduce yourselves. So we'll start out with you, Marina. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit more about you, who you are, where you're from, and any other fun information that you might want to share?
Okay, so I think you've done a pretty good job, but I've been a psychologist in practice for 19 years, and just listening that Nate works predominantly in schools, I said to Suwilo before he came on that that's a very different kind of beast. So I've done some school counseling sometimes, but I've got a private practice. I work with also from children age 2 to adults 92 was my oldest one. But I love doing assessments because I'm seeing how children really, really struggle when they're misunderstood in school. And sometimes it's the smallest tweak. I believe in holistic assessments. I very rarely give labels, although sometimes it's important to be able to give a label in order for a child to feel a sense of relief around something that they may be struggling with. And I really believe that a full good assessment can make such a difference in a child's life. So that's pretty much me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marina. Over to you, Nate. Do you want to share a little bit more about yourself, who you are, what you're about?
Sure. First of all, I'm privileged and honored to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about what I've gained through the years. So I started out as a therapist at a residential facility and for sexual maladaptive youth. And I still keep up on that training here in Indiana. We have a really good system for that we work through, and we go through trainings every year. So I've tried to keep that up just to stay current, because that's an issue and that's a growing issue, unfortunately. So that's where my background is, kind of starting out in the clinical world. And then I always have wanted to work in the schools. I felt like it's just such an awesome opportunity to work with kids and families and hopefully preparing them for the future, both academically as well as just socially, emotionally. And I felt like it was an opportunity to work with kids that are struggling as well as with kids that are excelling. So I've worked at the middle school and high school level. When I was in Warsaw, it had a very wealthy climate, and there was a lot of support there, and that was kind of a different animal than I am now. I'm working at a place where the free and reduced lunch, where the socioeconomic status is low, and it creates its own challenges for kids. And I'm working at the middle school level at this point. So it's just an awesome opportunity, and I'll share what I know and what I've worked with. School psychologists, they're very important. We have one at our school, and I work with her often. So Marina, I'll be excited to hear more about what you have to say as well.
Thank you so much, Nate. And yeah, thank you both for being willing to be a part of this time. And for everyone who's joining us today, I really do hope that through this very short session that we have an hour together today, that it gives you information that's going to be helpful, that's going to be beneficial as you're looking to support the young people that are in your life, whether that's kids that you have or whether that is students that you're working with, that it'll begin to give you some information that's going to help you support them in the best way that you can. I love the fact that, Marina, you touched on holistic assessment and holistic support, because that is what we believe in deeply and truly, and that is the core of who we are at Eleveight, is making sure that we are providing support for your students and for your children in a very holistic way that addresses all of the different aspects of what they're dealing with in their young lives on into adulthood. So just to give us a really quick snapshot of where we'll be going today and what we'll be talking about, we're going to just start off by jumping in and looking at what are the actual stages that your child goes through. For all of us, we've been through those stages. We're still going through those developmental stages. But what are some of the things that you can expect and can be doing and to support your child as they're going through the developmental stages? We're going to touch on that and just give you a few pointers around some of the things that you can be doing to support your children through the different stages they're going through. Then we're going to actually look at what are educational psychology assessments? What are their uses? When should you consider using them? And how does it work? What does the process look like? Because you may hear about these assessments and might hear about a need for them, or they're placed in school, but when is a good time for you to start considering whether or not that's going to be an option for your child or not, and which assessments are going to work best for you, because there's so many different tools out there. We want to make sure that we're getting something that is going to cater to the needs that your child has and that your students have. And then we're going to look and what are some pointers that we can give you through this journey, just in general? And Nate will just answer a few questions around what are some of the things that we can be doing to prepare ourselves as parents and as teachers. What can we be doing to prepare for this whole journey that we are walking alongside these students and our children with? So what are some of the things we can do? And then we want to open it up for questions. So if anyone has any questions for us, I feel like a lot of the times that's where we're able to give more clarity and get a little bit more out of this time, is when we're able to answer some of the direct questions that you have. So would love to have as many questions as you have, and we'll cover as many as we can in the time that we have. But if you have any questions as we are going along and as we're going through this information, please do not hesitate to put it in the chat box, or you can put it in the Q&A if you want to do something a little bit more private. And we would be more than happy to tackle those questions right now. And if we don't get through it today, if we don't get to your question today, we'll be more than happy to answer it at a later stage. So please feel free to ask questions as we go along. So I am just going to go ahead and just get us started and jump into the material and start by looking at how can you be supporting your child through the different stages that they're going through. So I'm going to focus in specifically on the emotional and social developmental stages that you might start seeing and that you may have experienced, because I'm sure there's probably parents in here and teachers who have obviously worked with students across the board at all of the different levels and all of the different stages of development. If you've been a parent of multiple children, you've probably seen lots of the different stages already. If you're a new parent, maybe you're waiting in anticipation to see what this all looks like. But this is just a snapshot of some of the things that you might be seeing and just a few pointers of how you can be supporting your children through these stages. So the very first stage that we look at, obviously, is bringing your child home from the hospital, newborn baby, the excitement and the fear that I am certain comes along with that, bringing them home and having to take care of this new person that has entered into your world. And so this first stage, based on one of the theorists out there, and there's so many theorists, but I'm honing in on this one. The first stage happens between the age of birth to the age of 1. And during this stage, it's so important for your child to feel like they are in a safe, nurturing environment. Love and affection are critical at this stage because it allows your child to develop an ability to trust the people in their lives, the immediate people in their family, and then in future for that to extend to other social interactions. So this is critical for them to have that foundation to be able to build a good sense of trust. And when this is lacking or missing in a child's development, it can lead to them having issues with actually developing good, healthy, trusting relationships in the future. So some of the things that you can be doing practically during this stage is just showing your child a lot of love and a lot of affection. And I'm certain that most parents do this and have done this if you've had kids that have grown through this stage. But hugging your child, giving your child cuddles and kisses is so important at this stage. And how can you not, right? They're super cute. I'm sure all you want to do is just cuddle and snuggle with them. In between, obviously, changing diapers. And then also just lovingly talking to your child and caring for your child, and also creating a caring and loving environment around them so that they're seeing that in the environment that they're surrounded by as well. And thirdly, I would also just say, just being present, just being there for your baby, allowing your child to know that you are there, you're not going anywhere, it's a safe environment. And especially if you already have help, or if you have someone who is coming in to help you with your child, a nanny, it's still so important as the parent, as the primary caregiver, to allocate time when you are present, you are there with your infant child so that they know who their primary caregiver is. And then the next stage of development that you're going to walk through is between the ages of 1 and 3. And so these are the fun years, but also can be quite challenging. You know, you talk about the terrible twos, but during this stage, it's so important for your child to now start to develop a sense of autonomy. And I'm sure those of you who have walked through this journey before have seen it with your children, where they start to try to do things on their own. They're trying to feed themselves now, even if they really can't. Some of the cutest pictures that you see online are of, you know, babies attempting and missing to eat their food and it landing absolutely everywhere. But it's so important for them to have this opportunity to actually become autonomous in their environments because it allows them to gain the confidence that they need as they continue down this stage of development. So some of the things that you can be doing at this stage as well is just allowing your toddler to begin doing some small tasks for themselves. So letting them try to eat for themselves, letting them try to pick out an outfit, even if it comes out being a pretty crazy combination, just giving them opportunities to be autonomous in that way is going to help them develop a healthy autonomy at this stage. And also giving them praise when they get tasks right. So when they do it right and they get the food in the mouth and not everywhere else, praising them for that, but also encouraging them when they're not getting it quite so right. So they may not be hitting the nail on the head with what they're trying to do, but still being encouraging even in those moments as well is going to help them feel comfortable and confident to keep trying new things and keep getting in there and building that sense of autonomy and the ability to be able to engage with the environment around them. And again, speak positively, but honestly. You don't have to pretend something is what it isn't. So just be honest with your kids in a very, very encouraging and positive way as they attempt and try new things with the world around them. This is always a very fun stage to watch. I feel like, as I personally am not a parent, but as an aunt, it has always been a really, really fun stage to watch kids go through. Can be messy as well. The next stage that you will be walking through with your child is between the ages of 3 to 6. And this stage is referred to as initiative versus guilt. So you might start to see there's a lot of question asking at this stage, curiosity, extended curiosity about the environment around them, but also you'll start to see your children asserting themselves into the environment around them in play and interactions. So this is when they start to take initiative around certain activities or games, and maybe even creating games or creating new activities that they want to now do with their friends, or even suggesting, hey, can I have this friend over so we can play these games? You'll start to see them assert themselves a little bit more in their environment around them. And to be supportive at this stage, just keep encouraging these initiatives. So as your child comes up with a new idea of something that they want to engage in, something that they want to do, encourage and support this and help them work through it, even when it doesn't work out. And when it doesn't work out, just reminding your child that it's okay, we can try again, we can do something different, because this will help them build that healthy sense of being able to go out and interact and take initiative with the world around them. Obviously, it's also so important. I feel like it's so important at this stage, just to clarify that also having good boundaries is important, because as your child starts to initiate and take initiative in even more social circles, you want to make sure that they're protected from any harmful situations or harmful circumstances. So making sure that there's healthy boundaries as well that are set to be able to protect your child during this stage as well. And encourage question asking and curiosity at this stage, because as it's starting to get heightened as well, it's so important that it's encouraged and that it's not stifled. The age-old adage is that, parents at some point get tired because the kid keeps asking questions and you say, oh, just do it because I told you so. And I can imagine that after so many questions, it can get very frustrating. But sometimes, even if we don't have the answers for our kids, still encouraging them to be curious and letting them know that we don't always have the answers either. There's nothing wrong with that. But allowing them to still tap into that curiosity, because it's only going to help feed into their future development and their future sense of being able to be curious with the world around them. And then as they start to enter into the school years and start to interact with their peers between the ages of 6 and 12, we go into what's called industry versus inferiority. And what this is now they start to actively compare themselves with those around them, with their peers, with the people in school. Am I getting as good grades as my friend Jane is? Or am I doing as well in sports as Musonda's doing? Or am I able to be as artistic as this other person? So that comparison piece starts to come in. And so with this stage, as a parent and as a teacher, I think it's so important to just reassure our kids that, they don't have to be the best at everything, and they don't even have to be great at everything. There's going to be areas that they're going to thrive in and areas that they're going to do exceptionally well in. And then there's going to be areas that they might not do so great in. And your love and your concern for them as a parent is not contingent upon whether or not they come home with that A grade every single time, or whether or not they're the star on the soccer team or not, but that you love them because of who they are. So it's so important to reinforce that they will be good at some things and they won't be good at other things, and that's okay. And then also just again, just reinforcing, showing that unconditional love and concern for your child, regardless of whether or not they're doing exceptionally well in one area over another. And then the next stage then that you're going to start looking into, which is another fun stage, but in a very different way than perhaps the toddler stages, is when your children start to enter into their teenage years. So between the ages of 12 and 18 can present a whole nother level of challenges as a parent and as a teacher, as this is a stage where your child is starting to develop their unique identity. And with that, there's a lot of questioning and there's a lot of distancing from the family unit. And there's also just the developmental stuff biologically that's going on in your teenager that creates a lot of turmoil and ups and downs and roller coaster of emotions because they're trying to figure out who they are and what their stamp on this world is going to be. And so in this stage, I think it's so important as parents to just allow your child, allow your teenager to develop their own unique identity outside of you, outside of your expectations or what you might want them to be. And that can be probably the most challenging thing, to be able to allow your child to go down a path that might be completely different than what you envisioned for them or what you hoped for them. But being able to support them in this process will help them develop a healthy sense of identity, which without this, it can become very challenging for them in the future. Because they can get confused as to who they are in this world, what they're about, and that can create a lot of instability if the true identity is not discovered and that process does not happen in a healthy way for them. So be there, support them, allow them to go on their journey and allow them to discover who their unique self is. And they're probably going to try a whole lot of different things, from maybe wanting piercings to wanting to change to a completely different wardrobe. They're just trying to figure out who they are. So encourage them as they go on this journey, as they go through this process. Be available for your teenager during this stage, but also don't smother them. Let them have the space to develop into the person that they are going to be, but also be available to establish healthy boundaries as well for them, so that they're secure and in a secure enough environment and space to be able to pursue who they ultimately want to be. And then this last stage, well, there's more stages actually to this particular developmental theory, but I'll just end at this one, between the ages of 18 and 40. So as your child is kind of leaving the teen years and entering into adulthood, they start to now look for opportunities to create their own intimate relationships and intimate connections outside of the family unit. And so as they're going through this and wanting to develop these relationships with people outside of their high school friends, now they're moving into the college space. Maybe they're looking to want to settle down and have a family of their own, but they're looking to make these intimate connections and relationships with people around them. And so as a parent, your role obviously doesn't end here just because they've reached adulthood. You can still be a support to them as they navigate their way into adulthood and start making their way into adult living. But just showing up for your child and being there for them, supporting them and being there when they ask for it. So if they ask you for advice and wisdom and insight, don't be afraid to give them that and to show them the support in those ways. And then also, I think some of the more challenging aspects of this is transitioning from being a parent to actually being an adult with your child who is now an adult. But don't be afraid of being vulnerable as an adult with your child at this stage, and sharing a little bit more about some of your experiences as an adult and some of the things which have maybe impacted you and lessons you've learned. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable with them at this stage, because now you're not dealing with a child anymore. You're now dealing with someone who is an adult and has entered the adult arena with you. And as I said, through all of these stages, there's so many different emotions and experiences that we have, and different challenges and different joys that we have. But ultimately, just being there for your child through this is going to help them develop emotionally and socially in a very healthy way that's going to set them up for successful relationships in the future. And so as you're going through this process with your child, you may start to ask, when should I be considering, or should I be considering, why would I be considering the option of assessments? Where would this come in? So it's important to be aware that as far as educational assessments go, that they're not necessarily avenues that every child is going to have to go down, but it doesn't mean that they're not beneficial for anyone who chooses to use them. But some of the things that might actually decide for you whether or not it's a good idea to actually use an educational assessment might be, if you find yourself having any number of these questions, it might actually be indicative or a sign that it's good to actually check in with a specialist, talk to someone about the possibility of your child getting assessed. So if you notice that there are behaviors that are worrying with your child at any one of these stages, it might be a good opportunity for you to reach out and say, hey, is this a good time for me to look into assessments? If a teacher has raised concerns with you about what they've been seeing in the classrooms, it might be a good opportunity as well for you to look into, okay, what can we do? Are assessments an option in helping support our child? If you find that your child is consistently avoiding school or not wanting to go to school, or is not feeling well every time they have to go to school, and you take them to the hospital and there's nothing wrong, it might also be a sign that maybe it's time to get an assessment done, just to kind of see what's going on there, and help them manage and be able to enter back into the educational space in a healthy way. Or if you start to notice that perhaps your child is not meeting some of the milestones along the way, or find that your child is exceeding the milestones pretty rapidly, that might also be indicative of the fact that you might want to look into getting your child assessed. And so that being said, I'm just going to hand over to Marina and have her talk a little bit more about, okay, so what are these educational assessments like? What are the options out there? And what does the process actually look like? So if we get to the point where we say we actually need to utilize an assessment for our child, what is that going to look like? What are the options for you that are out there? So Marina, I'm just going to go ahead and hand over to you.
Okay, so thank you so much for that. It kind of brings back a lot of memories about the little people and my son, and why they come for assessments. Um, so I think for me, the most important thing about an assessment is to take a child and look at why the child has been sent to me for an assessment. And often the behavior that's seen is not necessarily the reason. So, you get a symptom, but we are trying to find the cause. Um, and for me, that's the most exciting thing, because often a child might be behaving in an inappropriate way, or they might be struggling to concentrate, and so the teacher or the parent will then say, the child, I'm sure, has attention deficit. But the minute the child comes into the room, it becomes very, very easy to see that it's got nothing to do with attention. It's got everything to do with a sensory difficulty, or it's got something to do with a processing difficulty on an auditory level, or it's got something to do with anxiety. So for me, the greatest excitement about doing an assessment and getting to the bottom of it, it's a little bit like a car that's broken down and the lights come on, but we think it's one aspect of the car, but it's actually another aspect. And the quicker we start, the younger we start, without a sense of shame, the quicker we can help the child and the parents understand that really an assessment is a source of information. It's there to help us, it's there to support us, it's there to find the right professionals. And so before we jump to conclusions, because the child isn't concentrating in class and we zap the child on Ritalin, or before we think that it's an anxiety issue, when actually it might be a sensory issue, we get a real understanding of what's going on with this little person. So that's one of the reasons they often refer. An assessment for me, as I said, is something that is very holistic. And so, so I'm quite specific about the tests that I use, and we're going to go into that a little bit later. But I'm always very honest with children. So when a child comes for an assessment, I will say to them that they've got some strengths and they've got some weaknesses, and I mean, I always use myself as an example. So I say, when I came into this world, I came with the box and it had no mathematical skills. It had just enough to help me become a psychologist. And it kind of lightens the mood, because then, they kind of think, okay, so I say, look, that, I had to have a lot of talking and I had to have a lot of listening, but maybe you don't need that. But what we need to do is help you with your weaknesses so we can get you through school. So then it kind of softens the blow and it helps them understand that there's really essentially nothing wrong with them. So I had a little girl who came for an assessment this last week, and she's been struggling with school. And that was one of the times that we actually had to give her a label. We had to say, you have dyslexia, and we had to explain it to her. And her little face, it just shone. And she said, so that means I'm not dumb, because she's actually so bright. I mean, her mathematical scores were very, very high. And this is a bright little girl with a phenomenal imagination. But in school, she felt dumb, and she's not dumb. So there are times that we have to give a label, because it helps us understand, okay, so what does this mean then? What do we do with this? Okay. So I think that is the time that it is important to give a label. And the slide is very good, because it's really saying, what are the delays? What are the disabilities? But where are the gifts? So another little girl that I assessed many years ago was acting out terribly in grade 2. She was so gifted that they were putting her on an accelerated program. And it was still, I mean, she was finishing her accelerated maths by the end of the day. So the minute she got to a school for more gifted children, and they taught her in a completely different way, her anxiety dropped, she made friends, she felt a sense of belonging, because it made more sense to her. So in a situation like that, we're using it as a tool to understand, how does this child process information? How does this child function? And what is the best possible placement? And it's what Suwela was saying a little bit earlier, that it's not only to see their deficits, it's to see what is a good fit. Because sometimes all you've got to do is take a child out of an environment and put it somewhere else. And immediately there's an immense change in their behavior, in their attitude, in how they feel, in how they perform. Sometimes the school is just not a great fit for the child, just like one's working environment wouldn't be a great fit for them. So what it isn't is about labeling. So we don't do assessments so we can prove that the child has ADHD and needs so much Ritalin. And we don't do assessments so that we can prove that, the child is one way or another. But we do assessments, so it gives us the best source of information. And from that point, we can decide where to go. It's, as we were saying, it's not a tool in order to prescribe medication. Then we can say, well, this is the problem. So very often a child may look autistic, but actually they're sitting with an immense amount of anxiety, and that's what we have to look at. I like, so you said one-stop shop in understanding your child or student. Well, sometimes it's the start of a one-stop shop, but I love teamwork. So it's a sense of, okay, so we start here, and then we need to introduce an OT or a speech therapist, or maybe a little bit of a neurologist. And that just gives us a whole picture of how we're going to go ahead and help this little person. Assessments are also used for older people. So in South Africa, we're finding more and more that adults are going to a specialist that works in assessment for re-looking at their career. And those are interesting in and of themselves, because, as a youngster, you kind of often pushed into a career, or there's a sense that maybe this would fit you. But as people get older, they're looking at it and saying, I actually have no understanding of who I am, and this isn't fitting. So that's another avenue for having an assessment. Okay, so I mean, there are a lot of assessments that can be used. My personal favorite is the Whisk and the Whipsy, which is the Veshler scales. The reason I like them is because I can say to parents, we're not looking at this as an IQ. We're looking at a cluster of tests, and they in themselves say something. So when I look at, for example, the verbal comprehension, I will say to parents, okay, so we're sitting with things like the comprehension, and we're sitting with things like how the child absorbs information. We're sitting with things like how a child makes links between pieces of information. So if I say to a child, how is an apple and an orange similar? By a certain age, they have to be able to say, we eat them, they're fruit, because that helps the child have an understanding of how things work together in a classroom. Um, by the same token, the stuff that's non-verbal will give me a lot of information about their spatial orientation, how they are able to see stuff from the board and put it down, how they process information, what their speed is like. So a child could have very, very slow paper pencil skills, but they can remember things really well. And what I love about this particular test is that I can say to parents, okay, so if we look on this graph, we can see that your child learns better through your ears and doesn't learn so well through the eyes. And so when I write my reports, I get a little bit anal and they're quite long. But as a parent myself, I really would like to see that I have a real understanding. And then I can say to the parents, okay, so when this child gets older, make sure that they've got a whiteboard on their table, because the child learns better by writing stuff down. And if they're just listening to the teacher, then they're going to switch off. So that for me is a sound assessment where we are able to look at things holistically in terms of how they're functioning on a verbal scale, on a non-verbal scale, how they process, what's going on with their attention. And what's very important for me is how they function in the test. So I have an intern, and she really made me laugh the other day, because she said to me, her lecturer told her that the child has to sit across from her and they have to be very quiet. So I'm like, well, good luck with this one, because the child has absolute attention deficit, and I want to see how you're going to do that. So I always teach my interns that actually it doesn't matter if they're lying upside down, if we're doing it outside, if they're eating while we're doing it, we're getting a full sense of how this child functions, and we're there not to catch the child out. We are there to understand and to see what they are best at. The Stanford Binet, all of these tests work quite similarly, but I think I've spoken a lot more about the Veshler because for me, it's one of the better ones for me. But they can look at things like the Stanford, they can look at the Kaufman. So a different psychologist will look at a different kind of assessment. Okay, so I love to do emotional assessments because very often a child is sent to me, and they might not be able to cope academically, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on an emotional side. So if we can understand what's happening with that side of the assessment, then we can say actually the child does not need Ritalin, and the child does not need 70 million sessions of OT. Actually, you as parents need to shake a leg and spend a bit more time with the child, or stop fighting, or understand that maybe the child doesn't like being screamed at, and that gives a real understanding of what's happened. It also helps the teachers to understand what happens in a classroom and how best the child can function. And with that, we also look at sometimes, I don't often do it because I believe that a good emotional assessment and a very, very good intelligence assessment will give us quite a good understanding. But there are times I bring in one or two other kind of tests where I look at how a child is able to write. And with that, so there's a lovely test called the Purcell, and they kind of answer certain questions, and that will often tell me how they write, how quickly they write, what they have to say, how they finish the sentences. So those are often the kinds of tests we can look at quite holistically. We've got a behavior assessment. We've got a whole lot of reading skills, mathematical skills. I myself don't really use them a lot because, as I said, if you're doing the other stuff, you get a really, really good sense of how this child is functioning. Okay, so Willow and I were kind of saying that it's quite a long process. And the reason it's a long process is because we want to get a full understanding of what's going on, not only in terms of the children, but in terms of the family. So what I often do is I make sure that I meet both the parents, if possible. In South Africa, ethically, we have to have consent from both parents, unless it's been sent by a court order, or unless one parent is unable to. But for the most part, we use that assessment. And for me, it's really, really important to get a full background history. So I would ask the parents in that assessment intake, as we call it, what was the birth like? What happened? Were there any traumas? And sometimes parents will say, well, you know what, have I ruined my child because I didn't breastfeed? No, actually, I'm not interested if you breastfed or not. I'm interested in, did the child latch? Because if the child can't latch, it may say something about a sensory difficulty. It may say something about a speech impairment. If the child has reflux, again, it might say something about a sensory difficulty. So all of those little background histories tell us an immense amount of information about how we're going to link what's happening now and how the child functions. In that assessment, I also give parents quite a lot of information about what I do, much like what we are chatting about now. And I also ask them for any questions. I make sure that they know that the child has to have had a good breakfast. Um, and despite the fact that I tell them, please pack a healthy lunch, I do sometimes get McDonald's, and I get chips, and I get sweets. And then we have to kind of reconnect, and you can't have a Coke because you're really jumping off the walls. So yeah, it can get quite interesting, but it also, again, gives me a lot of information about what's happening at home. Session 1 and 2 I often do in one, if a child is able to focus and they're not too little, or if there aren't any major difficulties. And I always do it in the morning because that's when the brain is the freshest. And session 3, I often kind of add the other little bits that have to be done, do quite a lot of the emotional assessment. If a child isn't very verbal, I do a play intervention, because then in that way I can get quite a lot of information from them. And once that's done, we collate all the information and we do a parent feedback where we show them the strengths, the weaknesses, we do the recommendations, and then a report is sent out. The reports are quite lengthy. They're probably about 10 pages, and they also include how the child functions, recommendations for teachers, for parents, stuff to do at home, and also where to from here.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Marina. I think that gives a nice overview of not only what they are, what the assessments are, and what options are out there. As Marina has mentioned, there's lots of different tools, and different psychologists are going to use different tools or be trained to administer and interpret different tools. But there's so many options out there. If at any point you have any questions, again, that's what we're here for, is to help clarify what might best work for you and for your child in actually getting where you need to get, and finding out what you need to be able to best support your child. And so just as we're looking to wind up, I just want to touch on then, so looking at the journey as a whole, as we look at supporting our kids from the moment that we bring them home to the moment that they actually leave home, what are some of the things that you can be thinking about on this journey in order to best prepare for it, in order to be prepared for the different stages and possibilities of needing assessments, but then also preparing them for possibly going out to college and university and future studies. These are all things that don't necessarily have to catch us by surprise. They're things that we can be planning and preparing. So I'm just going to hand over to Nate, to Kramer, and I'm just going to ask you, I just called you Kramer, sorry, that giving in a little bit of our history there, but I'm going to hand over to Nate. And so Nate, I'm just going to just start by just asking, in your experience, what are some of the most common challenges that you have noticed parents experience, students experience as they go through this developmental period in their lives?
Yeah, it seems like students in general, from what I've observed, I think it's getting to be interesting just with technology and how the world is changing. Even in my short career, I've noticed that it seems like students are sometimes lacking basic skills. And that's the interpersonal, social, emotional part. And that's something we've really started to, it's kind of been started to be pushed here in the States, at least, as far as teaching those skills and helping students understand how to deal with things like disappointment or rejection, or, if they have a difficult time in a class, figuring out how to navigate that, how to work through that. So, I mean, just teaching students the basics as far as, how to problem solve and work through things, whether it be in the classroom or interpersonally, has been kind of a challenge, and something that I've seen has been on the rise. And I think parents play an integral part in that for sure, as far as just being a support for their student and helping them along the way and being kind of a sounding board for them along the way, is something that, when you see students that have that support at home, I mean, it's a complete game changer. And sometimes that's out of, the family's control. But if they have at least one parent that they feel like they can talk to, it is a definite game changer. So I think honestly, just the basics, I mean, just helping students through those things has been, something that it seems like I spend more time doing now than I did when I started, which I've been a school counselor now for 10 years, and I was in residential before that. But just in my short career in a school, I've seen that kind of take an uptick a little bit as far as what students need there.
And would you say there's any specific things that parents can be doing to prepare for this developmental journey, for the social emotional journey that their children are going to be going on?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as you were talking, at the beginning and just going through everything, I think I really want the parents at my school to hear this presentation, because I think understanding the developmental process that they're going through and just being active in that from the beginning. I mean, taking an interest in what your child is doing, what your child is involved in. This is kind of our world now, but putting down your phone and disengaging from technology yourself to play and be there with them and just talk with them from an early age, and then build that up through, I mean, elementary school, middle school, high school. Because seriously, one of the biggest factors for a student's success is when they have a parent that is involved. And I think I see a lot of parents, I see this especially, I think, with dads, especially dads with middle school girls, oftentimes it's a scary time for a dad, or in high school. And I think, I saw a video, and this was like it was a tender, heartfelt video where a dad, from the time when his daughter was in kindergarten, he did like a video progression where the first day and last day of school, he would ask her, what did you like about school? What did you dislike about school? And you could tell that was a process they had normally. And it was, by the time she got to be a senior, you could tell like they had that relationship, and it was just heartfelt. But I think that involvement from an early age in building that is huge. And just that trust factor and that interest lets that child know that if they go through a struggle, or if they're dealing with something, whether it be, like I said, I mean, interpersonally, academic, whatever, they're going to have that parent and they're going to have that support behind them. And there's even a movement that we do, and this is really hard, parents, this is really hard, but kiddos that go, like when the first time they spend the night, or they start spending the night at someone else's house, if that parent and that child has an understanding of, if you ever call me and you need me to come get you, I'll come get you, no questions asked. And I'll be there for you. I'll come get you. I won't ask you. If you want to tell me what's going on, great. Because that is the out that a lot of kids need, that they feel like they can't, if they feel like they can't do that and they're in a compromising situation, they'll stay in that situation to to the, I mean, detriment of themselves and others. And so that's just an example of, and that is hard. I'm not a parent either, but I've seen that. I've seen some parents that have enacted that, and just that level of trust and communication. And most of the time the kids will share that. But I think that starts from an early age.
Absolutely.
And if you have that, and that's just like any relationship, but if you have that, you're going to be able to navigate and work through whatever you're going to come across. And then that obviously transitions into the last phase of adulthood that you were talking about. So I think that is the key.
Yeah. Wow. No, absolutely. And when it comes to then not just that social and emotional journey, but even just planning for them educationally. So getting them through the primary, secondary, high school, elementary, middle school, high school years. And then on into college as well, because there's that piece as well. What can parents be doing to plan for that and to be ready for preparing for that journey that their child is going to go on as well?
Yeah, that's an important question, and something that we kind of start talking about at an early age. And I think one thing we always talk about is that it takes a village, and we need to all work together. And Marina, what you were talking about, it's pretty cool to hear from a school psychologist what you do and what you go through. And I think one of the biggest things is if everyone can kind of work together on that. We have, before they would get to you, Marina, we have what's called the multi-tiered support system for kids at MTSS, and we have committees that meet. And at my school, we meet together with each grade level, and the other schools, elementary, the elementaries do it, the high school does it as well. But if a child's having an issue or a problem, we meet as a team and collaborate with parents, look at everything from, if they're taking medicine, are they getting sleep, what's their diet like, obviously their test scores, and come up with what's actually going on. And then we'll refer them to our version of Marina and kind of figure out a plan on what they need, because that's going to start early. And some kiddos don't need much, and you kind of figure that out through that process. But I think that takes collaboration from everyone, and parents too, as you're going through that phase, just talking with the school. If you notice an issue or something going on, talking with your doctor. And we, even at the elementaries, we have a system that follows that student through, so we can kind of see if they've been involved in that process before or not. But beyond that, just for students in general, we talk about career clusters and educate students at an early age with that, just so they can start to understand what is out there and what options they have. And then we do interest inventories later in middle school and kind of talk through that process of specifically what they're interested in and what they would like to do. And then high school, we have different scholarships and things that they do. But one thing we always talk about is we talk about college, and college isn't necessarily a 4-year degree. It could be, for us, any training after high school, an apprenticeship, a certificate, just some sort of training for students after high school that's going to propel them to some sort of a career and something that they can give back. But students often, I found at even high school level, but middle school and even sometimes elementaries, feel a lot of pressure to figure that out. And we just always encourage them. It's okay if you don't know your specific career, but we encourage them. I mean, even the elementary level or middle school level, if they can job shadow or sit down and talk with somebody that does that job, that has been, and we have career days and different things, and COVID has kind of put a little bit of a damper on that. But if you have that for those kiddos, it's an awesome opportunity for them to learn and figure out more about what they might want to do. So that's something I would strongly encourage and say would be a really good things for those kiddos as they try to figure out more about what they want to do. But yeah, that was a long answer, but
A
Yeah.
good one, though, a good one. So thank you so much for that. And I think you've already even
Sure.
touched on the last one. So I'm not even going to ask that question because, as you said, it takes a village and it takes so many different people being involved in the process of being able to identify what the needs are for the students, for the individuals, and then coming together to find out what's going to be the best way forward for us to be able to meet these needs that the student has. So I just want to open it up really quickly to anyone who has any questions before we close off here. But as we even just wait, you can type the questions in the chat box and then we can respond to those. If you have a question or if you would like, you can always raise your hand and we can unmute you and then you can go ahead and ask your question. But if you've heard things today, if you've heard about, I know as Nathan was saying, all of the different services that are available and the different ways that they're supporting students. If you've heard some of these things and you are wondering how your child can have access to some of those things, please don't hesitate to reach out to us because as I mentioned, we are, we're in the business of providing a holistic service that allows your child to be able to be taken care of from as early on as needed all through their educational and developmental journey. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions, and we're more than happy to provide any guidance that we can. And I'm certain that a lot of schools as well, not just in the States or South Africa, but here in Zambia as well, have systems and have people in place that are there to support your child. A lot of amazing resources as well at different schools available to help your child through this journey. So don't be afraid to tap into those resources and use them in order to set your child up for the very best that you can. So if anyone has any questions, we will take them now. I am not seeing any at this point. I hope that means that we covered the information thoroughly. But again, if anything comes up and anyone has any questions along the line, you're more than welcome to reach out to us.
Question.
Yes. Okay, I have a question.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Craig.
Thanks very much for you and the team putting this together. It was really informative, and I don't want to reflect on too much what happened in the past. Maybe I made a few mistakes, but I mean, looking forward, especially now, as it was brought up, I think by Nate, with social media and these other influences with the kids and setting boundaries and these things, is there ever not too much we can, support, protect, comfort, talk to them about, I mean, I guess as a parent coming from old school sort of upbringing, there was the tough love, there was the let kids sort it out for themselves approach. Maybe that's why we have problems the way we do in the world today. I'm not sure. But I just wondered if you or anyone on the team thinks that there's a point at which there's too much involvement from the school, counselors and parents, and sometimes maybe the kids need to work things out on their own. How do you look at that?
No, that's a good question. Nate, would you like to tackle that, or Marina, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think, man, I find that it's so much better to meet students where they're at. I know that's cliche, but I always feel like there's so much that they're sorting through and working through themselves, and it's good to be there and just have that. I think I want to encourage you to have an open line of communication with your kiddo and just talk to them about where they're at, questions they have, what they're going through. And I do think it's good not to just give them the answers, but I think there's a point where they need that for sure. But I think it's okay to allow them to wrestle with things. It's okay to allow them to question and try to figure this stuff out. And I mean, even something I deal with a lot is the gender identity, and kids really struggling with that and what that is. And I mean, no matter what my personal beliefs are, I think I always talk to them about, right now I feel like kids feel so much pressure, and I always tell them it's like you're trying to hit a moving target right now, and you need to just relax, take your time. I think kids will figure it out, and especially if they have a good support system from a parent, they're gonna figure it out. And I just always tell them just to relax and to really think about things, talk to people they trust, and allow for that time and that wisdom to come through. But I think it's good to have that open line of communication and talk with them and help them to realize what is true. And I think if they have a good family, they're going to do that.
Yeah. Anything to add, Marina, to that?
Yes, actually, I agree with everything Nate's saying. The one thing that I found coming out of COVID, particularly with the adolescents, is their lack of grit. So to answer your question is, I think that we've come out of a generation where children are a little bit too mollycoddled. And there's a wonderful theorist called Winnicott, and he talks about the good enough parenting. And there's this idea of allowing children to struggle a little bit, because in struggling, they find solutions. Whereas if they're too indulged, which I think is perhaps this generation, they've come out of a pandemic, and I say to parents, it's a little bit like every difficulty equips them to the point that we each have our own little like cabinet of experiences that we can draw from. And I'm noticing a lot of these adolescents have got nothing in their cabinets. So then we have a trauma that comes, or we have a pandemic, and they've got to homeschool and they're not around their friends, and things are hard and parents have run out of resources. And they're opening up these empty drawers because they haven't been allowed to struggle a little bit. So I think that idea of struggle versus, I mean, having an adolescent myself, I always say to him, you can tell me anything. And I mean, the stuff I hear is too funny. And sometimes he'll tell me in the car, and I feel like, thank goodness I am a psychologist, because I'm like a duck, like I'm really piddling under the water, but I'm gliding along and I'm going, yes, tell me. But this stuff is mind-blowing. And I'm thinking, as an adult and as a therapist, it's hard for me to process some of the stuff he's processing. And so it's what Nate said, you have to create a platform where they can tell you anything without you freaking out.
Okay. Yeah. And I think there has to be a very clear understanding that there's a difference between providing support and coddling or pampering. And I think if we are giving our students and giving our children good support, it does not mean that we don't allow them the privilege of building up resilience, of battling through stuff, of having to deal with difficult things. It doesn't mean that we're coddling them. It means that we are there to help them along the journey. So is there, I guess, Craig, from my perspective, a simple answer to, is there such a thing as too much support? If we're using the word support in the right way, I would say absolutely not. But if that support veers into something which is less support and more coddling, or creating some kind of, just an unhealthy dependence on the support systems, then I would say we really need to look at that a little bit better and find ways to improve that, so that we're actually providing tools, support that's going to set the children up for success on their own 2 feet, with whatever life throws their way. So I recognize that it is past 7:30. I know we have a couple questions. I'm so sorry we probably won't get to them today, but I can always try to get some responses out to people. I think I have your information, so I can always respond via email. I know one of the questions was, do we provide these assessments in Lusaka? Yes, Eleveight provides these assessments. Myself and my team are trained to be able to provide different psychoeducational assessments. So if you reach out, we can figure out what's going to be the best fit for you, and we can make a plan for that going forward. But thank you so much, Marina and Nate, for joining me today. And thank you so much, everyone who took time out of their Thursday evening to join us this evening for this session. And I hope it was helpful, and I hope it was informative. And don't hesitate to reach out. Our information is at the bottom of the screen. don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions, and hopefully we'll see you for some of our future sessions. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening.